Hey, everybody. Welcome into the Fantasy Six Pack Network. I am your host, Dylan Clemons. My co-host today is Keith Flemming, who is a DFS contributor for football at fantasy6pack.net and Fantasy and Frames. Today, we are continuing our training camp check-in shows where we are going around to all 32 NFL teams and interviewing a beat writer or reporter on what they've seen or heard at training camp. In this episode, we are talking the Atlanta Falcons, and we are joined by Miles Garrett, who is a sports reporter and anchor at Fox 5 Atlanta. Miles, I appreciate you giving us your time in such a busy part of the year. How you doing today, man?
Doing pretty good, fellas. How y'all doing?
Doing well.
It's a good time to be a Falcons fan, man. We've been through some rough years, some rough decades for some of us older fans like myself, but real excitement. I think you were there 2 weeks ago, right, for that home practice. I couldn't believe there was like 3,000-4,000 people in the stadium.
Yeah, that was actually a practice I wasn't at, oddly enough. I was in house for that one, but I've been to almost all of them at Flowery Branch. But yeah, a lot of buzz around this team.
People are excited, which is great to see. Because, like I said, Falcons fans, we've been through some rough stuff, to say the least.
Absolutely. Before we jump in the interview, I just want to remind everyone, please hit that like button. Please subscribe to the channel and hit that bell for notifications so you know when a new video drops. And then head on over to fantasy6pack.net/plans to become an all-access member, and that's where you get access to our award-winning rankings, draft cheat sheets, and F6P Discord, where you get all your custom league questions and all your custom league advice from anybody on the Fantasy Six Pack staff, and that truly is the best part. And right now, you can also save a little cash by using promo code F6PNFL24 for 15% off. But without further ado, Keith, how about you hit Miles with the first question that we have for him today?
You said you did want to change to the Bijan question, right?
Yes, please.
Okay. So we know Bijan. Arthur Smith did not want to use him early in the season last year. We saw a lot more usage down the stretch. It was amazing when he got the ball. With Zach Robinson coming over, we know he's from the same offensive scheme as guys like Todd Gurley. We've seen these running back with just monster. Obviously, CMC kind of in the same system now. Do you think that this is going to be Bijan just unleashed on the league where he's, seeing 20, 25 snaps a game, both in the run and the pass? Or do you think they're still going to kind of, I don't want to say save him, but they don't want to overuse him and make sure they keep him healthy throughout the season?
No, I don't think the plan is to necessarily save him. I do think that there's going to be a lot more usage out of him. I mean, we've heard Zach Robinson say that, the ideal scenario is to use him like Christian McCaffrey, have him out in the slot, have him, taking handoffs, have him in a shotgun formation, just all different ways to really get him the ball, which is, I think, something a lot of Falcons fans would agree with, when you take a running back that high, because you don't see running backs taking that high anymore. Mm-hmm. So at this point, it's like, okay, you got to justify the selection. So, and obviously a guy who's that talented, who's got the same relatively, you don't want to say he's like the best running back in the league, but there's a reason he was drafted as high as he was. He's a fantastic running back prospect. And I think you saw glimpses of what he could do last year, especially really early in the season. I think you saw like some flashes here and there, like that first touchdown he had, and then the behind the back catch, and, the long run against the Saints later in the season. There was always a bunch of glimpses, but as far as how they're planning on using him, I'm certainly excited to see it. I wouldn't call it and say that, they're going to use him, X amount of times, but based on the information we've been told, I would imagine that his workload will be a heavy part of the Zach Robinson offense.
Yeah, that's great to hear. He wasn't a complete disappointment for fantasy last year, but he was definitely a little bit disappointing. Keith, you got anything else to add before we move on?
Just that, do you think Algier is still going to be involved in this offense week to week, or is that something that you think he's going to be more relegated to just kind of a backup?
No, I think he'll still be involved pretty heavily. I mean, he's gotten decent amount of reps with, the starters. I wouldn't call it like a 1A, 1B situation, because I do think Bijan is firmly set in that role. But at the same time, I think you're going to get a fair share of Tyler Algier, like probably situationally, down and distance type stuff. So, yeah, I wouldn't imagine you're going to – he's another guy who's been sitting the preseason. So, you have to imagine he's going to get a decent workload in this offense. So, yeah, I don't think he'll be completely cut out, but I don't think he'll be 1B either. I think it'll be more or less like a situational type running back.
Good deal. Like to hear that. looking at the quarterback position, and hopefully with you guys being Falcons fans, hopefully they finally figured out the quarterback situation with signing Kirk Cousins in the offseason and drafting Michael Penix in the draft. Everyone is just kind of plugging Kirk in and thinking that he's going to be the same guy fresh off the Achilles injury. And I'm a little bit skeptical, but I want to hear your thoughts on, do you see him being the same guy he was pre-Achilles injury right off the bat, or do you think it's going to take him a little time to get acclimated?
Well, it's tough to say, right? Especially with the fact that they're not playing him in the preseason at all. You aren't really able to see, how he's able to move in a live game rep. We've seen him in practice move around, and he's fully sprinted on some reps too, much to the disdain of Raheem Morris on some plays. But no, I mean, it's tough to say, right? I mean, I expect to see him be at full strength. That's what the Falcons are telling us. Now, again, it's difficult because the Achilles injury is typically a devastating injury, but luckily as a quarterback, you don't have to rely too much on it. Ideally, it's not like we're talking about a running back here. His game is typically won with his arm, obviously. So it's definitely going to be sort of a work in progress. You're going to want to see how it goes. Kirk has said that he wished he did play some preseason because he does enjoy getting those reps. Obviously, Raheem Morris has made the decision to not play any of his starters in the preseason, so we're not going to see it. But yeah, I mean, it's tough to say. You don't really know because you haven't seen it, and you won't see it until week 1. So it probably wouldn't be fair to give them that until after that game against the Steelers.
Real quick before I ask the next question, because you kind of brought up, Raheem not playing his players. Me and Dylan were talking about this beforehand. Do you think the McCarthy injury played a role in Penix not playing and that, them basically shutting it down? Because it sure does seem like that's an awful big coincidence when he's already your backup and you're like, all right, he's done. We've seen enough.
It could be. I think it had more to do with the Falcons' injuries they had in their first preseason game themselves. They lost to Marco Helms, Rondale Moore, and Braylon Trice. All three. I don't think all of them are season ending, but a lot of them, I'd say 80% of them are probably season ending. The others are going to be gone for a good portion of the season. So I think that had more to do with it. That all happening within the span of like 48 hours down in Miami. So I think that was probably a big part of it. Now the JJ McCarthy thing, obviously, that was probably a big element of it, but I do think they're different situations because I know JJ probably wasn't going to open the season as starter. I think Darnold was pretty set, at least starting game 1. But I think there was an assumption, obviously, that JJ would start at some point this season. That's different with Michael Penix Jr., which makes the situation a little bit more puzzling, especially considering that you have Taylor Heineke on the roster. Now, again, that could change. Taylor Heineke could be a guy that you trade or is cut by the end of this preseason. He's certainly a candidate to potentially not make the roster at this point. So, that could also be the mindset too. Like if you do get rid of Heineke and God forbid Kirk Cousins does get hurt, then you really have no quarterback at that point. So I imagine that's probably what the mindset was.
All right. We're all excited about Drake London this year, at least fantasy people. I mean, as a Falcons fan, I am, because I think he's a legit stud receiver. And if you look at what he's done, 1.91 yards per route run with Ritter, he had over 2.4 with Mariota. Like, he's been very effective with what he's been given. But we know in like the Rams offense, all these offense, there's always other receivers that break out as well. Do you think that's Darnell Mooney? Do you think that's going to be Kyle Pitts? Or they've already said they're going to line him up at wide receiver. Who do you think from literally the wide receiver position is going to be like that number 2 target guy or breakout guy other than Drake London in this offense?
I mean, I would say Kyle Pitts just because of the way they're like, it's kind of like the whole Bijan Robinson thing. I think they're using him in different ways too. Like they're putting him out wide. He's split as your X. They're putting him in the slot. They're putting him in the tight end position. He's all over the field now a little bit more than he was in the Arthur Smith scheme, which is, again, we go back to the Bijan Robinson conversation, kind of something you always really wanted to see out of a tight end who was drafted at number 4 overall.
And not Jimmy Smith, getting more red zone targets.
Exactly. But, and obviously Kyle was dealing with injuries, last year, right. Especially, he still wasn't 100%. This year he now is 100%. Kirk's really pushed him. We've had some good conversations with Kirk, kind of talking about, and Kyle, really for that matter, but of Kirk talking about, hey, were you really running as fast as you could? Is this like what you're trying to do? Like, he's got that guy to push him now. He hasn't had that since Matt Ryan, and obviously we saw what he was able to do that one season with Matt Ryan when he was still a rookie. So I think that helps him because you have that guy who can push you now, because Desmond Ridder, skill set or not, he still was a rookie at the end of the day, not firmly set as starter, did not have that experience or anything like that to kind of back up his game. So it might have been a little bit different for him to push Kyle Pitts and be like, hey, I need you to do this when there's not much to your game at that point yet. So guys like Kirk Cousins, Matt Ryan, they at least have a resume to fall on. And, I think the players respect that.
Right. Yeah, it was great that you mentioned Kyle Pitts, but you kind of answered my next question. So I'm going to give you a different question here. Let's bounce back a little bit to Drake London, Miles. And I'm curious, does he have a good chemistry with Kirk Cousins thus far in camp? Like, is he finally going to see 150, 160 targets possibly in this offense?
I believe so. Right now, I think Drake is Kirk's favorite target, if I had to guess, based on what I've seen. He seems like his go-to right now. I mean, I'd say his favorites are, it goes without saying, Kyle Pitts and Drake London. But if I had to pick a number one, I would say it is Drake. They seem to have a pretty good connection, and they both have spoken well of each other. And we've seen the reps out in practice. It seems like Drake is his guy to go to. In a situation like that, they all rave, about Drake London, kind of his dog mentality per se. They love saying that term when it comes to Drake London, and we've seen it, right? Like, we've seen glimpses of it. You see the great catches. He had to make a lot of those sometimes with the quarterback play, but now that he has a guy like Kirk Cousins, I think his numbers are about to shoot up because, like you said, he has had pretty respectable numbers given the quarterback play he's had.
Yeah. First last year in contested catches, he was 29th in targets. So get that man the ball. I'm very excited about that. I know we don't talk about defense a lot on fantasy, but I got to, because the Falcons actually, I think, are going to have a decent defense. And it's been so freaking long. We have not had a decent pass rusher since John Abram in 2012. That was a lifetime ago. So as a Falcons fan, I was so excited about the Judon trade. I understand some people are upset with what we traded for. I think we had to take shots to sign Simmons to go with Bates. We have Terrell. You got Grady back. Like, how good do you think this defense can be, with Raheem Morris, who is one of the best tactical defensive minds, in the NFL?
Yeah, I think those two signings, or trades rather, you want to call one of them a trade, one of them a signing, they answered your two biggest questions, right? You didn't address edge rusher in the draft, and you were relying on Arnold Ebiketie and really Braylon Trice to sort of be those guys. And Braylon Trice looked promising, was still a rookie, but has that devastating injury against the Dolphins. So now you have an even bigger need. So you go out and you get the guy who's basically on the, you talk TJ Watt, Miles Garrett, all these other big time pass rushers. Who's the next guy? Matthew Judon has been that next guy in that conversation. So you automatically bring in a guy who's been one of those dogs, really, so that this team has been missing. So you get edge rusher taken care of. I think this linebacking unit is probably one of the deepest on the team as far as a depth perspective. You got Nate Landman, Caden Ellis, Lorenzo Carter, Arnold Ebiketie. There's so many bodies in there now. And now JD Bertrand, a rookie who's done pretty well in the preseason, I think. But you've got a lot of bodies in there that are very good. And now the secondary, that was your other question, because you knew what you had in AJ Terrell, you knew what you had in Jesse Bates, but you were still kind of unsure about cornerback 2 and the safety position, the other safety position. And you still have that question mark at the second cornerback spot because, it's still really a battle right now between Mike Hughes and Clark Phillips. And I do think that, Mike is going to get the starting nod. Clark's had a great camp so far. I'd say he's probably had the most interceptions, but, you now have a guy, you don't have to rely on Richie Grant back there, who was kind of an improve-it year, and he still might be. But, he this was a year where it's like, okay, it's either going to work or it's not going to work at this point. So, you lose DeMarco Helms, and then you have a really big need. So you get another all-pro. And so you have 2 all-pros now as your safety position. So from a defensive standpoint, you filled all the holes, really. Again, like I said, that cornerback spot still might be up for discussion. But your defensive line, Grady Jarrett's back, David Onyemata's back. You have a really good second rounder now who's waiting in the wings, and Ruka Rororo to potentially have as a depth piece there. So there's good depth there. So again, a lot of question marks have been answered, but they just have to execute now. And, they look good on paper. You want to say that, but, it's all about execution when it comes time to game day.
Absolutely. And then, Miles, one more question here before we get you out of here. And we are a fantasy focused channel, so I wanted to get at least one fantasy football question. And that is, who is the player that is going to surprise fantasy managers the most, good or bad, from this Atlanta Falcons team?
Good, I'd say Drake London. I think Drake London has top 5 potential fantasy football in as far as receivers are concerned. I would say so. Kyle Pitts is always the wild card, right? Because it's either he's going to be the greatest tight end numbers you're ever going to see, or he's going to be Kyle Pitts like we've seen the last few years, where he doesn't score any touchdowns, and it's a bit of a letdown. Bijan Robinson really is kind of up for discussion, because I know in a lot of rankings he's listed as like a top 5 overall prospect, and it's all on sort of potential rather than history, right? Because you think it's like the Kyle Pitts thing. Like you think he's going to go off, but you don't know. Like Drake, at least I think, has more to his resume per se, because you've seen what he's been able to do with bad quarterback play. Whereas I think the other 2 guys, it's more of you're basing it off of potential rather than what we've actually seen. So it's tough, right? Because it's like you're making a bet. I mean, that's what it is at the end of the day, right? But it's tough because you're going to have to. I do think the Falcons defense is going to be a lot better though. So I think they do have top 10 potential there with the addition. So I would say Drake is probably the biggest not sure thing, but if I had to pick somebody, I'd probably say Drake London as being your safest option, as a guy who would go off in this offense.
Right on. Keith, you got any names you want to throw in the hat real quick?
I mean, we were talking about this the other day, that the Falcons are a really tough team for fantasy this year, because all the guys feel like they're kind of properly rated. London being kind of the wide receiver 8-9, depending on what list you're looking at. Pitts being around tight end 5-6. I think Pitts has the most upside of any of these guys, just because he could put up tight end, number 1 in fantasy numbers, to where
he could put up receiver numbers as
right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that they are going to use him a lot as a receiver. And I think Miles could speak to this more than I could, but what I was most excited seeing in the practice they did, which they were scrimmaging each other, was just all the motion pre-snap. And it seemed like every time they ran motion, it was to get either London or Pitts in a one-on-one matchup, where they were just so much bigger than the defender on them. And I mean, it really was like shooting fish in the barrel, whether, it was Cousins or Penix, whoever was throwing it to them. So I'm just really excited to see what Robinson can do in this offense. And we've seen from the Rams, the Packers, the Dolphins, all these teams that come out of this, scheme, this philosophy, that they know what they're doing. They know how to get athletes the ball. They're on the field. So for me, it's just stay healthy. And I think this offense is going to be really special.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be the bottom line, is going to be health, because again, it's got potential, but they got to put it together. So it's a lot of what ifs at this point. So, that's why they're a hot pick to, win the NFC South pretty handily at this point. It's a matter of if they can be a Super Bowl contender with this roster right now, because like we've been saying, on paper, it looks pretty damn good.
We've been fooled before, though, as Falcons.
We have, exactly. I think Falcons fans are used to it.
All right, Miles, absolutely fantastic stuff here, man. Before we get you out of here, why don't you go ahead and give some plugs here? What do you got going on this season?
For sure. Yeah, no, I basically post everything I do on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it today. My handle is @MilesGarrettTV. For any folks who might be watching in the Atlanta area, we've got a lot of good stuff, as we're partners with the Atlanta Falcons and the Georgia Bulldogs. So we do a lot of content with them. I do the Georgia post game show every Saturday. So any dog fans out there, I usually do a lot of that stuff. DJ Shockley and Suda Upadea do great work with the Georgia show as well as the Falcons. DJ obviously does a lot of good stuff with Atlanta, as well as the rest of our team. So we do a lot of good Falcons coverage for anybody who is interested in seeing it.
Awesome. Great stuff, Miles. Yeah, everyone make sure to go give his stuff a read and go watch his stuff. But once again, Miles, thank you. And I hope to do it again sometime. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, fellas.
Thanks, Miles.
All right, Keith, that wraps up our Atlanta Falcons training camp check-in. I want to thank you as well for filling in for Joe Bond tonight. I hope you had a great time. I know you love
Anytime
talking
about the
Falcons
man.
football.
Anytime I can nerd out on my Falcons for sure, and not get laughed at, which is the best part about it. So I appreciate you being a good sport.
Absolutely, absolutely. Before we get out of here, though, why don't you go ahead and plug some stuff? Let everyone know where they can find your work and what you got going on this year, man.
Yeah, man. A lot of DFS content. Me and Joe Matz will be back doing the Fantasy Six Pack. I believe we're going to do it still on Thursday night's show, where we give our favorite expensive median and bargain plays for DraftKings each week. Me and Chris Rodman may be doing some stuff as well. I'm not sure. You can also find me on Fantasy Six Pack, where we also do a DFS show over there. I think I'm going to be doing an article as well for DFS for Joe, if that is something he still wants me to do. But you can hit me up on Twitter anytime. That's at Keith Flemming. Love answering questions. And I mean, let's be honest, I don't have a lot going on. So hit me up. I promise I will respond. And then you can catch me every Wednesday on ESPN Northwest Florida on Inside Drive with Ryan Mulvey and Jay Henley, where we've been talking DFS golf and gambling up until this point. Starting in September, obviously, we will pivot to football, and we are ready to do that because that is a NFL crazy show. Ryan is a Niners fan. I'm a Falcons fan. Jay is, I think, now a Bills fan. He changes every 5 minutes, but Jay can get away with that. So, but a lot of good stuff. We're looking forward to football being back.
Absolutely. Yeah, make sure to check out all Key stuff. That DFS show you do with Joe Matz, that's one of my favorite DFS shows that I watch weekly during the season. So, of course. But yep, once again, that wraps up the Falcons training camp check-in. Please hit that like button. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. For Keith, I'm Dylan. Talk to you next time.